Howdy folks, and welcome back to World of Tanks with the mighty Jingles, and it's time for another tank review. This is an upcoming, I don't actually know when this tank is going to be released, but it's going to be relatively soon, an upcoming French Tier 8 Premium Medium Tank. This is the M4A1 Revalorise. I don't know, it's Wargaming, why you do this? Why you keep giving me tanks with names that are hard to pronounce? I'm going to have to make up another name for this tank, aren't I? I'm going to call it the Charles de Gaulle because it's French and it's got a really, really big nose. Oh, Jingles, you didn't go there. Yes, I did. Yes, I did. So anyway, what is the Charles de Gaulle like? Should you care? Is this the kind of tank that you'd be interested in buying? Well, what you basically have here is a tank that, to all intents and purposes, is exactly the same, or even in some cases slightly worse, than the American Tier 5 M4 Sherman, with one very important difference. Well, with two very important differences. The American Sherman's Tier 5, this one is Tier 8, and this one gets a really, really big gun. This 105mm D1504 L51 gun is, to all intents and purposes, it's like driving around in a Sherman with a Russian D25T 122mm gun firing APCR ammunition. It has 200 penetration with its standard ammunition, which is APCR, 250mm of penetration with its premium ammunition, which is high explosive anti-tank. It does 390 average damage, 480 with high explosive, which only has 53mm of penetration. The accuracy isn't bad, 0.36. It does have a kind of a long aiming time though, 2.8 seconds. Aside from the slow aiming time, the other drawback to this big old gun is the slow rate of fire, 4.69 rounds per minute, but that's pretty much what you'd expect when you consider that they've taken a massive dirty great hoofing 105mm anti-tank gun and somehow managed to jam it into the turret ring of what is, to all intents and purposes, a Tier 5 M4 Sherman with 1400 hit points. And that really is what you have here. It is, to all intents and purposes, a Tier 5 Sherman with a really big gun and a lot more health. It has exactly the same armour. It doesn't have the same engine, it doesn't have the Wright Continental. It's a French version of the Wright Continental engine with exactly the same horsepower, 460. And of course, because this tank has a bigger gun, it weighs more. So it doesn't have the same power to weight ratio as the Tier 5 M4 Sherman. And the lower power to weight ratio, in combination with the lower top speed of 40 kilometers per hour, remember the Tier 5 M4 Sherman gets a top speed of 48 kilometers per hour, and it quite handily reaches that top speed because it's got the better power to weight ratio. Means that, well, this isn't really a slow Tier 8 medium tank, but it's definitely not a fast one either. It definitely feels very, very sluggish, particularly when you're going up hills. And this relatively poor mobility is probably the single biggest problem with the tank, not the armour, which is terrible, because when you get into a Tier 10 match, and this tank does get into Tier 10 games, no other Tier 8 medium tank really has the kind of armour to stand there and take hits from Tier 10 tanks, not even the Super Pershing. So you have to rely on your speed and mobility to keep you operational when you're in a Tier 10 match, and this tank really doesn't have that kind of speed and mobility. The DPM on the gun, however, is competitive. It's certainly not the best. The top of the tree, as far as damage per minute is concerned in Tier 8 medium tanks, rests with tanks like the Panther 88, the AMX CDC. This tank is competitive for damage per minute with tanks like the T54 Mod 1. It's actually slightly better than the Type 59, and it's significantly better than the Super Pershing. But questions of damage per minute aside, you've got to stop and ask yourself, why would you buy this tank rather than the AMX CDC? Because this is not the only French Tier 8 medium tank that is available in the premium gift shop. The AMX CDC is available and has been for some time. And it's also got a very good 90mm gun. And it's blisteringly quick with a monstrously powerful engine and an amazing power to weight ratio. Whereas this thing, well, isn't. You could, of course, attempt to make the case that Charles here has significantly better armour than the AMX CDC, and that's certainly true. The AMX CDC's got 30mm. Charles here has up to 63mm, but don't forget this is a Tier 8 tank. It's going to get into Tier 8, 9 and 10 games, and 63mm of armour is still garbage. in tier 8, 9 and 10 matches. In fact, the only real significant advantage that having this much armour has over a tank like the AMX CDC is when it comes to armour overmatching mechanics. And I have seen one instance where having more than 30mm of side armour, for example, did save this tank, but it's not something that you can count on. A far, far better defence is to be able to avoid the hits in the first place by having the superior mobility, which is what tier 8 medium tanks, with the exception of the Super Pershing, rely on to stay alive when they get into tier 9 and 10 battles. And this tank just does not have that kind of mobility. Having said that, however, this is definitely the right kind of gun to have on a tank like this. The gun has 390 alpha damage, just like those Soviet 122mm guns, which means that you have to spend significantly less time exposed shooting at your targets in order to do the kind of damage that's going to make a difference to the outcome of the match. In other machines like this, that don't really have much in the way of armour, but have high DPM, rapid-firing, low alpha damage guns, you have to stay exposed, taking return fire for a lot longer than is healthy in order to do the same kind of damage. And I'm talking about tanks here like the Sherman Firefly, for example, which is very, very similar to this machine. It's also based on an M4 Sherman, but it doesn't have the same ability, and the armour is pretty bad. The 17-pounder gun on the Sherman Firefly is pretty good, but it doesn't deliver all of its damage up front in the way that this tank does. And so in order to do the same kind of amount of damage in a tank like the Firefly, you have to stay exposed and keep firing the gun, and that means it's giving the opponents much more opportunity to return fire at you. So while the mobility of the tank is disappointing and the armour is absolutely terrible, this is definitely the right kind of gun that you want on a tank that has these kind of characteristics. One final word on the mobility of the tank, however, and it's something that I have overlooked up until now, and it's to do with the manoeuvrability of the tank, the hull and turret traverse, both of which are very, very good, 40 and 42 degrees per second. But take that with a word of caution. This is by no means a dogfighting, scrapping, brawling medium tank. And that's not just because of the relatively poor power to weight ratio, rather it's more because of the slow rate of fire of this big 105mm gun. Exploiting the manoeuvrability of the tank in close range dogfighting, brawling situations is a last resort in this machine, when you have to get around the tank before he shoots you and finish him off with that 390 alpha damage punch. If it's going to take more than 2 or 3 shots to finish off an enemy tank in close quarters, you are going to suffer because of that slow reload. It's just going to take too long. It's something that should be held in reserve as an ace up your sleeve for when you absolutely need it and there is no other option, but it's definitely not something you should be relying on in regular play. Anyway, that's quite enough theory crafting for one day. Let's take this thing out for a spin and see how young Charlie here performs in the heat of battle. Let's get the bad news out of the way first, because it really isn't pretty. Don't forget that this is a tier 8 medium tank that does not get premium matchmaking. Wargaming aren't doing tanks with premium matchmaking anymore, so this tank will get into tier 10 games. And if I'm being completely honest, I can think of any number of other different tanks that I would rather be in a tier 10 match than this machine. The other new premium tank that's coming out, the Skoda T40, give that thing 1400 hit points, the same as this, and give it APCR ammunition, and I would rather be in that in a tier 10 match than Charles de Gaulle here, and the Skoda T40 is a tier 6. It's the lack of mobility in this thing that really kills it in a tier 10 game. You've basically got two choices. You can either camp at the back and snipe, in which case you're going to be using a lot of premium ammunition, because the APCR ammunition that this thing has as standard has 200mm of penetration, which is fine in a tier 8 game, but it's, well, it's not that good at all in a tier 10 match. The high explosive anti-tank ammunition has 250mm of penetration, and sniping is, well, pretty much what that's for, because it doesn't lose penetration with distance in the way that armor-piercing ammunition does. And if you are doing this kind of sniping from extreme range, well, you'd best hope you don't get spotted, because if you do, you're basically in a tier 5 medium tank, and, well, you really don't have the armor to take any kind of hits. Any kind of tier 10 and some of the tier 9 tank destroyers at E100, they're going to kill you in 2 shots. And while the .36 accuracy is not bad at all, when you're shooting at targets that are 400 meters away, you're not going to hit the weak spots. So that's option 1 if you get into a tier 10 game in this machine. Option 2 is to follow the heavy tanks. Not the medium tanks, because you're just not fast enough to keep up with them, but stay behind the heavy tanks on your team and support them as best you can. Ideally, waiting for the tanks that they're engaging to fire before you pop out and smack them in the face with your 390 alpha damage, armor-piercing, composite rigid ammunition at the kind of ranges where you can hit the weak spots if you have to, with your 200mm of penetration. Of course, none of this is any news to Tier 8 medium drivers. This has been the lot of Tier 8 medium tanks in Tier 10 matches since time immemorial, but it's harder to do in Charles de Gaulle here because of the disappointing mobility. You're not going to be able to react to changing circumstances in the way that a T-44, for example, can when you're driving this little bugger here. So it is particularly important in this machine, and it's a good skill to have in any tank, but more so in this because of the relative lack of mobility, that you pay attention to what's going on the map, and you take steps to be in the right place at the right time when you need to be. Of course, even if you do choose to play a more passive role and try to keep this thing at long range, at some point, well, the crap is going to hit the fan, and you're going to have to get up close and personal, and it's in situations like this where the slow reload is going to be your undoing unless you have teammates there to back you up. The slow rate of fire of this 105mm gun means that you can't really keep an opponent tracked in the way that you can if you are firing a lower caliber gun with a better rate of fire. And you will often find yourself in situations like this where, if not for the teammates around you, you just get beat. So if you do find yourself in tier 10 games in this tank, then stay at the back and snipe, or if you do end up having to go forward, then under no circumstances go anywhere alone. Get yourself into a tier 8 match, however, and things are starting to look distinctly better, because while at the end of the day you may just be a tier 5 medium tank with 1400 hit points, you're a tier 5 medium tank with 1400 hit points and a seriously big gun. And when you're doing in the region of 400 damage per hit, it doesn't take that many hits in order for that kind of damage to really start mounting up. So I'm looking for a spot where I can stay in cover, because my armour is terrible, even in a tier 8 game. Hell, the armour on this thing would be terrible in a tier 5 game. But I need a position where I can pop out of cover, take my shot, and then immediately back up and avoid return fire. And there just so happens to be an ideal location here on the South Coast map, and it's right here. Of course, the downside of taking a relatively passive position like this is it's only an ideal spot if the enemy team all line up to get shot at, and, well, they really just weren't playing along. So, stayed here for a while. KV2 turned up to back me up, which is always nice, having that kind of derp firepower at your back just in case you need it. Friendly IS-6 decided to head it alone down the beach and try to take on two T-34s, and I'm not talking about the tier 5 T-34 medium tank either. That's a pair of tier 8 premium American heavy tanks. Did think about heading down there to back him up, but he immediately started taking a lot of damage. And now it's too late. So, well, he's committed, and there's no way I can back him up down there. And that's when I spotted the Tiger P. Pretty sure I hit the Tiger P there. We'll find out when he pops up again. Don't have sixth sense on this tank, by the way. Not entirely no, I didn't hit the Tiger P. Well, maybe I did hit him, but it didn't penetrate. He's giving me the side of the turret, and .36 accuracy is good enough at this kind of range to hit a target the size of a Tiger P's turret. He's still out there. There we go. Definitely hit him again. We've blown his tracks off. Unfortunately, he's going to get time to repair the tracks because of the slow reload on this machine. The IS-6 down there is dead, and these two T-34s are thinking about nosing around. That was never going to pen. Well, I don't know, it was worth taking the shot. I mean, they can't see me here, and I had nothing better to shoot at the time. Looking for targets on the hill. Nothing. And those T-34s are going to start taking their brave pills. They know there's something up here shooting at them, but they don't know exactly what I am. What they know is they've taken a hit and it didn't do any damage, so Maybe it's something with a big gun. Maybe it isn't. There's only one way for them to find out. KV2's still here with me. There's an enemy Stuart and Mill. I'll take a pop at him. Score a good hit. He manages to nail one of our Sherman Jumbos. And these T-34s are making their move. Come on, reload faster, damn you. There's a good hit. The KV2's fired and missed, which is really unfortunate. I could have used him hitting and doing some damage. And he's taking an awful chance there. But then again, the T-34s are moving, and the gun on the T-34 is not particularly accurate, and it's pretty bad at firing on the move. No, not worth the risk. This tank has 7 degrees of gun depression, which isn't bad, but it isn't particularly good either. And at that kind of range, well, you don't want to risk taking a hit from the big old 120mm gun on the T-34. The KV2, don't do it, KV2, don't do it. Don't, they'll hit you, get back, you don't have the gun depression. If I don't have the gun depression, you definitely don't have the gun depression. Need to make sure he's got space to fall back, I don't want to block him. He's taking an awful risk there. First T-34's coming over. Go for the tracks. KV2 hits him as well. That was a good solid hit. He immediately repairs, and I wouldn't have had the time to keep him tracked anyway. Not with a reload on this gun. The KV2 takes a hit. Come on, take this guy out. Take him out. Take him out. Come on. Oh, he's going to kill the KV2. Okay. Which is the sensible thing to do, but it means I'm going to get the chance to reload the gun. The reload on the T-34 is not good. In fact, it's probably about as bad as mine. So there's the first one. I can now use him and the KV2 as cover from this guy. Come on, come on, come on. My gun mantlet is definitely not good enough for this. But there is a friendly tank destroyer who's come down to back me up. I take a hit. It was inevitable I was going to take some damage there. I'm going to get to pop out, put a shot in, and then get the hell out of here. And pray for the tank destroyer with me to finish him off. So, we lost the T-32. No, we didn't. We lost the KV-2. And I took a hit, but we managed to nail 2 T-34s. With the timely assistance of the Stuart Mill who came down from the hill up there to give me some more direct support. So, type a quick thank you to him in chat, because he certainly earned it. And now it's time to go and defend the base. And this is where the lack of mobility, the sluggish engine... Well, it's not... The engine has exactly the same horsepower as the Tier 5 M4 Sherman. The only difference is, of course, that this is a much bigger, heavier gun. And so you can really see the difference in the power-to-weight ratio as this thing struggles up. It's not even a steep hill. And I'm just not able to get up here fast enough to do anything about saving our artillery. Of course, our artillery left it far too late. They're all probably still sitting there in their top-down view thinking, why is my health disappearing? As multiple enemy tanks pour into the cap circle and there's just me and the Stuart and Mill left. And this is where I make a big mistake. I think, okay, it's coming down to the wire now. Load the gold. High explosive anti-tank, because I need to make certain of these kills. And watch what I do wrong here. T-34, one-shot kill, and I fire heat ammunition into his tracks. And of course the tracks act as spaced armor, so it does absolutely nothing. Waste of money. If I'd fired the APCR, it would have gone through and it would have killed that T-34, and there'd be one less tank for me to worry about. But now I'm the last one left alive on my team. They're in the cap circle, but they're not going to cap. They know where I am. They're going to be coming after me. And that's when I run into the world's unluckiest Jagdpanther. Look at that bounce. And then he misses. Oh, he's got to be cursing. I'm doomed here, of course. I mean, everybody's trying to kill me now. The artillery are getting stuck in, but I'm going to nail this Jagdpanther before I go down. No question about it. He's definitely done. There we go. Got him. Can I get one more shot off before the Mongol horde here finishes me off? Can I maybe kill that T-34? No, Centurion's in the way. No, never mind. Oh, well. So, yeah, it wasn't a bad result, made plenty of money. Premium tanks don't cost an awful lot to repair. Tier 8 premiums earn an awful lot of cash, made over 80,000 credits profit on that match, and did around about 3,500 damage. It was mostly ideal circumstances, however. I mean, it was Tier 8 matchmaking. And while I was fighting the tier 8s, I was fighting other tier 8s that pretty much had the same reload as I did. I only had to fight them one at a time. And there was something else for them to shoot at rather than me, up until, when there wasn't anything else for them to shoot at other than me. So pretty ideal circumstances, and under ideal circumstances you can do a lot of damage in this tank. Of course, that's the problem. You're not going to be fighting under ideal circumstances most of the time. And when you're not fighting under ideal circumstances, if it comes to a choice between this and the AMX CDC, well, I'm going to go for the AMX CDC because its gun is just as good. Its armor is just as bad, but it has the mobility that this machine doesn't have. So this of course brings us on to the $64,000 question. Is this tank worth the money? And I am completely unable to answer that question for you because I don't know how much it's going to cost. I did ask Wargaming when they gave me access to this test account, the number one question, how much are you going to charge for these tanks? And they didn't know. They haven't decided on their pricing strategy yet. So I cannot tell you whether or not I believe this tank is going to be worth the money. I just don't know how much you're going to be expected to pay for it. What I can say is that even though I don't know how much it's likely to cost, I don't actually like it that much. And if it comes to a choice between this or the AMX CDC, well, I'll take the AMX CDC every time, thank you very much. And so whatever price point they decide on for this tank, unless it's very, very, very cheap, in my opinion, it's almost certainly not going to be worth the money. And that, of course, brings us on to the elephant in the room. Wargaming EU's pricing policies with regards to the packages that they're selling these premium tanks for. And it's something that a whole bunch of other YouTubers have picked on recently. And is a source of major annoyance to lots of people on the EU server. And it's to do with bundling these tanks with a whole bunch of premium time and gold, which you're not necessarily going to want or need, but you have to pay for if you want to get any of these new premium tanks. And the reason it's particularly annoying is that it just seems to be an EU server thing. If you go to the Russian portal, for example, all of the premium tanks that have been made available over the course of the last few months have been available as a bundle with gold and premium time, or just the tank and the garage slot, obviously, at a significantly reduced cost. It is worth pointing out that the gold and premium time that you get in these bundles with the premium tanks is very competitively priced. It is actually quite good value for money, but it's only good value for money if you value what you're spending your money on, and not everybody wants the gold, not everybody wants the premium account time. On the Russian gift shop, you have the option of buying either the tank and the garage slot or the tank and the bundle. We're not getting that option, we're not getting that choice on the EU server. Instead, if you want these tanks, well, you have to dig deeper into your pocket for a whole bunch of stuff you don't necessarily want, need, or are able to afford. It might not be so much of an issue if the whole Wargaming Premium account thing, the Wargaming Unified account thing was as unified as we were led to believe it was going to be back when they first announced the plans for it. And I'm talking about having the same credentials, if you like, across all three of Wargaming's products: World of Tanks, World of Warships, and World of Warplanes. Yes, World of Warplanes does still exist. But it isn't. The only thing that we share across this unified account is our premium account time. We don't share the gold, and while I've got more gold than I'm ever going to use on my World of Tanks account, it would be nice if I could actually use that gold on my World of Warships account without having to dig into my pocket and buy gold for that as well. If that was the case, then I might not object so much to being forced to buy all this extra gold and premium account time anytime I want a premium tank in World of Tanks, because I could use the gold in World of Warships, but sadly that is not the case. So ultimately, the question of whether or not this tank is going to be value for money, whether or not it's going to be worth you putting your hand in your pocket and spending money on this machine, is going to come down to two factors. It's going to depend on whether or not you think you're going to have fun driving this tank, and only you can decide that. I've shown you what the tank can do, I've shown you what it can't do, and based on your own playstyle and the kind of tanks you like to drive, you are the person best equipped to decide whether or not you're going to have fun driving this machine. And the second, and what I suspect is going to be the most significant factor in determining how well this thing sells, is what kind of choices you're given in how you go about buying it. Can you buy the tank and a garage slot? Or if you want this tank, are you going to be forced to dig deeper into your pocket to get the tank, the garage slot, a whole bunch of gold and premium account time that you don't necessarily want, need, and in a lot of cases are just simply unable to afford? Time will tell. Wargaming, The ball's in your court. This tank is going to be on sale, I'd imagine, before the end of the month. Although, don't quote me on that, because, hey, I've been wrong before, and I'm almost certainly going to be wrong again. But it'd be interesting to see how this is priced and in what kind of packages it's sold on the various different servers, because if this thing does only appear on the EU server in a package, well, a lot of people are going to be A, not very surprised, and B, very, very pissed off. So, there you go. The M4A1 Charles de Gaulle, the French tank with a big nose. As always, folks, I hope you enjoyed the video. Take care, and I'll catch you next time.